Hi, I'm Dale Denwalt, and today we're going to be talking about how rockets get made. Today I'm joined by Beth Berger, a science reporter at the Columbus Dispatch. Beth, thanks for joining us and talking about this story that you pitched and produced for Gatehouse and reporters all over the country. Thanks for coming on today.
Hey, thanks for having me. This story came about a few weeks ago. I was taking a tour with NASA Administrator Jim Brenstein and some of our congressional members here, and we were going through the Glenn Research Center up in Sandusky location. And of course, one of the things we're always looking for is like local connections besides the space research centers themselves. So, I was told that there were 124 suppliers in the state of Ohio that were helping with this mission. They were essentially subcontractors that might be doing work for Boeing or for Lockheed Martin, one of those larger companies that are way more well known. And I got the list, and we started looking through it, and it's kind of amazing. There's so many companies all over the place, large cities, small cities, and that's kind of how this started.
Yeah, I want to reiterate that. So when you think about who builds a spacecraft for NASA, obviously, you wouldn't normally think that NASA builds everything itself. They look to people like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, these historic names in aerospace. But if you dig a little bit deeper, you find companies like Lakeshore, how I pronounce this, Cryotronics, and dozens, hundreds of other companies around the country in every state doing these, some of them small little jobs, right?
Yeah, so, I was lucky in our state. We have lots of companies to choose from. There's about 15 here in central Ohio, and I found an engineering firm that had this patent on a temperature sensor about the size of a safety pin. I don't know if you can see this, but the sensor that they allowed me to look at, it's about this size, but it's way more frailer looking than that. And, that sensor gets dipped in liquid nitrogen going from room temperature and is able to withstand it and still function. It's put together under a microscope with using someone's hands maneuvering the parts into place. So it's kind of an incredible piece if you think about it. And that's just, you think about these projects, which are monstrous in size, and there's got to be lots of companies out there doing bits and pieces. When I was looking through the list, I glanced through some of the companies in other states, and I know you're in Oklahoma. So next door in Arkansas, I noticed that Walmart is even on the list, and I did not call Bentonville to talk to anyone at their headquarters, but I'm not sure what it is that they're supplying. Some of these companies, it's raw materials like aluminum. For example, when I was touring in Sandusky, there's this huge, massive aluminum cage. They're going to put the Orion space capsule in, and they'll be doing thermal cycling with it. So, depending on if the spacecraft is exposed to the sun, which is, of course, extremely hot, or if it turns away and then it becomes extremely cold, it has to be able to withstand those types of fluctuations and still function appropriately. So that is scheduled to start potentially this month. I need to check back in and see if there's an update on that timeline, but it should be getting transported up from Kennedy Space Center in Florida within the next several weeks, hopefully.
Wow, that's really cool. So you found, I'm looking here, 3,800 suppliers nationwide that are contributing to the next steps that NASA will take in outer space. How did you go about getting this information? Was it really hard?
I lucked out. A lot of times when you're looking at like a federal FOIA type request, it can take months, weeks, and in some cases, I know you and I've probably heard about from other journalists, years. This was something on their website. It wasn't a link that I readily saw. Of course, their website is voluminous in information that they contain there. So the spokesperson and the Ohio location sent it to me when I was asking about which Ohio companies. So that's how I was able to find it.
And you also wrote in one of your stories a little bit about the budget. these suppliers, they all need money to do the job that NASA's asked them to do, and their primary contractors have contracted with them to do. So it looks like for the next year's budget, 2020 budget, it's going to be an increase of $1.6 billion above what the president said that he wanted to fund it at, which was $21 billion. Anything else in sort of the numbers or the budget that kind of stood out to you?
So I don't have a breakdown of how much each individual company in each state is getting in terms of funds from NASA. I did have a state-by-state breakdown, and of course, states that had lots of companies, like you think California, which I want to say had around 700, maybe over that. They had probably, I want to say over $1 billion in spending when I looked at it. One of the things that always comes up when you're doing NASA stories is there's an argument, like, we have so many huge problems in our country. Why should we be spending money on this? And so, that was one of the questions that, was posed to the NASA administrator, Bridenstine, the other day. And of course, he says it makes our life better. It's, the developments in technology lend themselves to so many other uses here in our everyday lives. But he always likes to say that it's only 0.5% of the federal budget. So our federal budget is about $4 trillion, and the NASA budget is about $21.5 billion. So that gives you an idea.
Right, and one thing people don't realize, of course, NASA is looking out into space, but quite often they're looking back toward the Earth with their climate research and the satellites and everything they do. NASA does have a very prominent Earth ecological mission along with their spacefaring mission. Have you ever seen a rocket launch, one of NASA's launches?
I have not, because we aren't launching them here in Ohio. We do a lot of the testing in this state in terms of what our state does and part of that network. Kennedy seems to be the big place where most of those launches take place, and I'm assuming will take place for these missions as well. I did want to mention that list does include companies from all 50 states, as well as Washington, D.C., and I think there's even a few Canadian ones from Ontario that are thrown in there as well, even though they're not on the map on the website, obviously. And there are international partners, which I did not get into for this story, like Airbus, I think, is working on a piece of this, and you have European companies that are obviously pitching in. It's not a strictly U.S. company-based build. I will say, though, that when I asked about that, I was told that wasn't a requirement. It was basically, here's the parameters, here's what we need, get the job done with whoever. And, it did turn out that it did involve a lot of American companies.
Fascinating. Really excellent research here, Beth. Thanks for looking into this. Really with implications, people know about where the money's going and who in their state is contributing to the space program, I think is really important. Thank you so much for working on this for Gatehouse, and I guess we'll leave it at there. That's Beth Berger, science reporter for the Columbus Dispatch, joining us here in the Gatehouse Media Studios.